Hey everyone, welcome to our second 2023 Tinderbox meetup. Our typical format is to introduce anybody new. I look around the table, I don't see anyone new, so that's great, but we are always looking for new people. Second, we talk about our projects or problems that we're aware of that various community members are trying to address, and then we jump into just generalized conversation or specific demonstrations that anybody has prepared. So with that in mind, let's jump around. Again, I don't see anyone necessarily new, so we're not necessarily looking for introductions. So let's see if anybody has any topics that they want to discuss. Gentlemen, ladies.
Well, as always, Bruce raised the issue at the question of what is a federated something.
It came from what Dave was saying.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
And really that I don't want to take us sideways, and I am using Tinderbox to organize everything, but I'm in the process of rolling out a community, I think I've talked about it a little bit, primarily for mental health professionals, and so one of the pieces of it is, okay, fine, the tutorials, and oh my goodness, I've been through so many of these membership services. And I think that I finally decided on just going with the WordPress setup and Memberful, because that's and Michael, you probably would comment on this. My understanding is that's more server side in terms of security, whereas Squarespace and many of its friends are more JavaScript based, which can be more easily bypassed or defeated. Do I have that right from your perspective?
I don't know, and the HIPAA compliance issues. So I'm going to.
Well, there's no HIPAA here because we're not exchanging any patient information. This is for professionals, and any parents who might log in are told up front that it's not a HIPAA compliant site.
Got it. Yeah, I'm not familiar with Memberful, but WordPress 2 has its issues. It's like anything else. You just got to make sure you keep its plugins up, do it right.
Everything seems to have its issues. And what I looked at, well, what does David Sparky use? David Sparky uses Memberful.
Yep.
I don't know. That means something to me.
I agree with you. There's a nod. What would David Sparky use? I like that. That's a good quote.
And then of course, although kind of what you were saying, I mean, I wouldn't want anything like Twitter, but okay, there's Discord, there's Discourse, there's Circle, there's BB Press or BB Forum, I think. All of these different choices for how I create a community. But what I'm trying to do is appeal to people who are slightly tech adverse or very much at a beginning level and feel very left out. I mean, learning how to outline would make their day. That's my target population. And it's amazing when I've said it to colleagues, they say, when is it going to be up and running? So I've trained a couple of my staff and we're moving forward. And what is interesting,
they don't ask you what an outline is.
Well, they know what an outline is, and they know how to press the enter button. But let's say you want Roman numeral 1 and you want the letter A, that gets a little bit befuddling to them. And the idea that headers can create a table of contents and all of those things. So there's a wonderful world out there for them that that I'm in the process of putting together. And so we haven't finalized the website tool. I mean, I keep going back and forth between, I actually happen to like Squarespace. I have one of my websites up through them and it's easy. They take care of all the security. And I could just embed the WordPress plugin for security because I don't like their member site. And where Tinderbox comes into this is that I've created this gigantic, fully disorganized Tinderbox file that I'm loving because everything is in it. And, and because of that, I have all my resources, I have presenters, I have course content. Figuring out how to untangle all that, of course, is another matter. But it's there. And at the very least, I can search on words and I can find it. I haven't put any attributes in yet, but it's one giant outline. Well, anyway, let me stop there. If anyone does have experience with, oh, hi, Cody. You're going to say hi. If anybody does have experience with, well, fine, get out of your system. Okay. Yes. All right. Anyway, please, I'll put my email in once again. And if, Circle or Discord or Discourse, is something that anybody has any information or opinions about, I would welcome your input.
Well,
let me turn it over to others.
The Tinderbox forum is built on Discourse, and I personally, out of all of them, that's been my favorite for a whole bunch of reasons. But we can talk about it offline. And also making it cleaning up your Tinderbox mess. Over the Christmas, I've perfected my templates. So if you want to have a side conversation on that, happy to help.
Well, thank you. And will you be back on the ski slopes soon, or not quite yet?
Not quite yet. Yeah. All right. So
it's really nice to see everyone. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it.
Let's go back to our agenda. So one thing too is you guys might not remember, maybe about 14 months ago, I tried to integrate ChatGPT with Tinderbox, and I was having trouble leveraging the API. So if anybody out there in the community is looking in that, I'd love to find a command line API that I can integrate, pass stuff to ChatGPT and pass it back to Tinderbox through a command line API, if anybody's aware of that. We don't need to belabor it in the conversation, but I tried to do it like 14 months ago and I couldn't figure it out. So now that it's all the rage, I'd like to try it again.
Did you would have been using GPT-3, not ChatGPT?
Oh, maybe you're right. I was using GPT-3. That's right. I tried the open. I did try the open API ChatGPT as well, but I couldn't figure it out. Okay, go ahead.
The astonishing thing about ChatGPT is the uptake in the media.
Yeah.
It went from announced on November 30th to almost daily articles in Journal, Post, Times. Horrifying.
Yeah, well, my quick take on that is, for the cynical part on me, is it's the general public sees it as a way of hitting the easy button and getting something to do their homework for them. And that's the challenge, I think. So, but let's jump to Mr. Anderson. Mr. Anderson, you were nodding and something else.
So I'm originally put a hand up just to say, if things on the jobs for today, I'm happy to sort of go further with the thing that got raised on the forum about trying to work out sibling numbers in maps. And just flopping forward to the comments about discourse, has now sort of accidentally rolled from what we had before into the two new, the main Tinderbox forum and the backstage one. I have to say, as someone who's not particularly tech background, they're absolutely a sort of joy to admin. For once somebody's got it right. And for what it's worth, I note that it's actually the same bunch as did all the Stack Overflow and all its various clones. So it's kind of unsurprising, because that works fairly well too. So a lot of the whole sort of kudos and voting system and all that kind of thing is I think a direct port from Stack Overflow, for what it's worth.
So Mark, real quick though, I'm sorry, outline numbers in what?
There was this. We were talking about, this was the problem about flattening maps.
Yeah, I think you might be misunderstanding what I'm saying, but go ahead. But say
there were two sort of separate things that came out of that. I mean, the overall topic of flattening maps, I think the pennies dropped that it's where you actually, what you want to do if you need to try and have a hierarchy shown on the map, is you probably want to write it on the outline, and then have perhaps something that isn't the current map but uses much of its tools, that makes you a map of your outline, which you can then move around. I think the problem has always been, if you take all the maps and try and just smush them all together, you're always going to have collision problems. And everyone immediately says, I won't have that problem, or I don't care. And the answer is they will have that problem, and they do care. So that's why that one hasn't happened in a hurry. But perhaps there is a way around it if you start from the other end of the pipeline. The thing about siblings.
Go ahead. Go ahead. No. Yeah. So go ahead. So map is one, flattening maps and siblings. What was the other one?
So, siblings. No, that was really it. I was just looking. No, that was it. And I just recording on the fact of discourse being actually, pretty reasonable to run. I looked after actually the Tinderbox forums various since when it started as a wiki, which was just horror. That was just constantly swooping up the aisle so the pages were readable, because people then didn't understand wiki format, and I doubt they do now, most of them, unless they, are Wikipedia authors. And then we had various, PHP things, which were, the art of their time, but were horror, because you quickly dove into sort of Perl scripts at the back end, and if you don't have that grounding in. So discourse is pretty nice.
Okay, but going back to it though, you said I want to get to the specific of the words you use. You said something about outline maps. What was it?
Oh, okay, right. So there has been a sort of rotating feature request / discussion since I can remember back in sort of about 2004 when I joined the community, about this thing about people saying, what I really want to do is I just want to collapse all the maps, or uncollapse them. But basically, and you gave a very good example, what you want to do is you want to map out a process on a map, but you want to export it as an outline. And it occurred to me that actually maybe one way to do that is actually and it's probably ends up being a view that looks like a map but isn't a map. So in other words, we don't break the map in order to do this, but you actually start with the outline, because you are actually doing an outline. If this is part, if this thing here is part of that in your outline and what you want to export, that's how it is. So basically you create your outline, as it were, and then you drop all that into a view that basically removes
No, Cody.
Apparently Bruce doesn't agree with you.
I thought Bruce had a principled objection.
No, the dog stole something. I'll be right back.
Okay. All right. So we don't. Okay, I get it. So let's come back to that. Though I do have some. Yeah. I do think that's something we should discuss in today's.
So the sibling numbering thing was it came up separately, and people saying, "I'm working in the map. I move stuff. What I want to do is I've added stuff to the map. What I want to do is I want to be able to reorder it on the map effectively into the order it appears in the outline, because I haven't necessarily put it on the map, and the map is like the map." The map's Z order, its front to back overlap order, does reflect the outline, but most of the time you're trying to avoid things.
Okay, that's what I was looking for you to repeat. Was that statement?
So I have come up with there's a very, very simple way that you can actually do this. Is that
let's not talk about it now. Let's come back.
Okay, come back to it. Yep.
Okay, another thing I'd like to add is had a few things this week about linking that I think would be appropriate in the map view discussion. We could also be talking about parsing names. We had a good demo about how to parse text and basically break up text and explode a note so you can get the name and text you want based on a pattern. So we might want to review that. That could be good. And Mr. Rogers.
Yes, I just wanted to sing the praises of Tinderbox as a blogging platform. With the in turmoil at Twitter, people in general in the online world said that there's a renaissance in blogging, and to some extent there is. I follow a lot of those links, and a lot of people are enamored with just static HTML files, and that's what Tinderbox produces. And I've been blogging with Tinderbox since about 2001, I think, and it exports static text files. And where I used to have to manually type in HTML for certain features that weren't built into Tinderbox, because of the evolution of Tinderbox today, I've integrated exporting photos into Tinderbox. Not the image itself, but the HTML code that would cause the image to appear on my blog. once it's uploaded to the server. And if you follow Dave Weiner at all, who's a big blogging advocate and essentially invented RSS, his ideal world is that you create all of your content in one editor, and it appears in whatever platform or platforms you wish to publish it in. And the mechanism for doing that is RSS. And so I use RSS to publish to micro.blog, which will take your RSS feed and basically post it. My blog is duplicated on micro.blog. It's a bbonsai thing. I have a link to it, but micro.blog is set up a lot like Twitter. You can have a timeline and people can respond to you. It's much more interactive than static HTML. And then it will further republish that content to Twitter and Mastodon. It will also do it to Flickr, and it will upload my photos to Flickr, but they're very small, low resolution ones, so I've turned that off. But I do all my work in Tinderbox. I export as HTML and RSS, and one of the little tricks I had to figure out was to get titles, eliminate titles from my RSS feed to facilitate writing tweets essentially in Tinderbox. And that was I learned name contains, and I needed to know if the name, don't do this if the name contains. And so it was the exclamation point that negates that. So I spent some time in ATBRef this weekend. And normally whenever I do anything in my blog, it breaks and I spend days pulling my hair out. I've also learned to duplicate the blog, make a duplicate folder, delete all the old stuff so it's a smaller file, make all my changes in the duplicate, and then do the exports into a separate folder and look and see if I got what I expected to get. And so I had a very pleasant experience updating the Marmot this weekend and didn't have to ask Mark for help, didn't have to post on the forum. Everything worked. So I did it all by myself. So I'm just patting myself on the back today and being grateful for over 20 years of using Tinderbox. I may have actually learned something.
Awesome. So I have a few questions for you. One is, do you have an article you can write up on how we pull content from photos? I think that would be a great thread you could put up on the forum.
Sure.
Like that?
Yeah. That may. Oh, look, I know I did some stuff, but it may have been at Max Scripter or something. But yeah.
So if you can explain how you did that, that would be pretty awesome. The other thing I might want to throw out at you, if you're interested, and I can demonstrate it if people want, is let's say you're writing a blog, and obviously a big part of a blog is the keywords that you associate with each blog article to help facilitate findability, discoverability of it, especially when you're doing posts into Twitter. So I could share with you a function I created that would take any terms that you have in a term attribute or a keyword attribute, and it will automatically convert them to hashtags. So when you make your Twitter post, all of the hashtags associated with that post are already there. Similarly, it will add an escape key in front of the @ sign if you're trying to anchor to a name, so that would work as well. So that's something you might want to learn about. So it's basically the automation of the hashtags to help for discoverability of your social media posts.
Yeah, and there are people that are good at social media and take that stuff seriously, and I respect that. I am not. I'm not a big hashtag kind of guy. I just never got into it, and so thanks, but I mean, it's probably not something I'll follow up on.
No worries. But just to point on that, not to belabor it, is it's more along the lines of discoverability too. So even if you think about it in the context of Tinderbox, if you're using attributes like a keyword on your notes, you then later could do a search in Tinderbox on find me all of my posts or find me all of my articles that are related to these keywords. Right. So it's basically going back to Dave Weiner's concept of or even Bruce's comment earlier, everything in one place. Once everything's in one place and it's under your control, you then can search and find and you manipulate it how you need to manipulate it. Okay. Who's next? What do we want to talk about? If not, we can have Mr. Anderson jump in and share with us some of his map concepts. And by the way, too, I'm going to call out Art. Art, we're still waiting for your end of year process review. Maybe you can put that on your agenda for some time in the future. But until then, let Mr. Anderson jump up. You ready, Mark? You want to give us a quick demo?
Yeah, well, I can actually also, for once, I can show you something that I'm actually working on. Normally, I'm working on other people's stuff. Can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Yep, you're seeing
you're working on our book. I like it.
Well, this thing on this is next week I'm doing a course for Dini Grigar, a lecture for Dini Grigar, who amazingly has got I think 22 undergraduates who actually want to turn up for a 9 o'clock lecture in the morning on hypertext. Who knew? But so the thing I've been asked to address is there was something before the web. So if you think about it, probably if you're about younger than about 30, the web has been there all your life, and things change, and once we get used to something, it's often hard to imagine what it was like before. But the main reason I'm showing this is I don't know if you can see under each note there is a number. So, for instance, this one here has a number 9. This is number 5, and actually, all I've done is open up the inspector. Is someone was asking about this problem about what you know to be the if you want to know what the sibling order is, because it's actually hard to see, literally visually see on the map. So I did this very quick and dirty test. So using the caption, because it's probably the one thing I suspect most people don't use. And I also in the forum gave an example where you could use flags, because you can fit up to 3 digits, three characters into a flag that would sit. If I set a flag, it would sit above the notes. And if you if you make a flag with the number that is the sibling order, unless you go over 999 notes in your map, you should be good. And if you pick a fairly middle color for the flag color, it won't be too visually obtrusive. But it's very quick and dirty, this. But so all that's happening is there's a rule. I mean, normally I wouldn't use a rule for this, because rules always end up, if you're not careful, scaling badly. But what works with 10 notes, suddenly you're thinking, oh, crikey, it's all running now on 1,000 notes, and I don't really need it on all the time. But it was just to allow me to see how this works. So, for instance, one of the things I'll do here is, so this goes 1, 2, 12, and 4. And actually, I will probably want those as 1, 2, 3, and 4. And an easy way to do that is that we can go to use Quickstamp. And so if I select this one and it's 12, I can set that to think this way. There's an odd thing if you're going down in number. I've reported it. It's obviously unintentional. There's an off by 1 problem if you're trying to go to a lower number than a higher number. And I suspect what's happening is because, although what you see me do is just change a number here, it is a calculated sibling order. And behind the scenes, what I'm actually doing is I'm changing the orders in the outline. That's just so when I come to do an export of all the references that will be attached to this, they'll come out in a sensible order. But it struck me as a fairly simple thing that you can do, and suffice it to say, the rule that's doing select something. The rule that's doing this is actually inherited by a prototype, so you could turn on off. The only problem about it being in something like caption is you can't hide the captions. It gets harder to toggle things, to have things toggling on and off, because in fact what you have to do is reset all the captions on the map. But again, if you are at a stage in a project where you realize you've got quite a large map and you just want to linearize it, this is a very simple approach, quick and dirty approach you can take. And when you're done, you can just zero out all the captions and you should be good to go. Or you probably have done a large amount of the work you need to do. And as I said, on the map, you shouldn't notice any difference at all, apart from if it's reporting its caption number. Then yeah, you know that will change. But unless things are overlapping, and by which I mean that if I take these two here, so Note Memex is out a sibling order 5, and it was added after Trails, and the newer ones go on top of the older ones. If I was to make this one, let's see if I can do this. Joys of live demos, and I'm conscious of the off by 1 problem I mentioned earlier, so I want to make it. Let's make it 3. So I think I have to do 2. Is it right? It's come out. Yeah, there we go. 2. It's become 3, and the one that was 3 has now become 4. So it's bumped those over. And now, if I do this, Trails goes on top of Memex rather than underneath it. It's not everyone's problem, but anyway, I just thought that might.
So real quick though, if you were to drop Trails on top of Memex, it would create a container.
Yes, that goes back to the separate conversation. Well, one of the things I've suggested is you probably need a mode for a map where you disable nesting.
Correct.
So
that's what we've been talking about in Backstage. Yeah.
But as I've said, well, and it's a conversation slightly on the Backstage. But my strong suggestion is don't do it in map view. Make another view for it, because although it looks like a map, it's not the existing map. And I think trying to do both behaviors in the same formal view will only end in tears, because either people have stuff that doesn't work, or something that used to work won't work because it's now impacted by a new feature. But I think the idea is one whose time has come. Unless anyone's got any questions on this, then I'll stop sharing.
Well, I do have a couple comments going back to first. Let's ask questions about this, and I want to go to the second topic. So, anybody have questions about this? I think it's awesome. Just for my chipping in, I'm going to steal it immediately.
Yeah, well, there's a thread in the forum anyway that discusses this, and also shows how you could do it with a flag.
Okay. All right. So if there aren't any questions, the comment I have, and maybe this will ultimately lead into Backstage, but this is a great example of what I've been trying to solve. This is an example of a process map. Now, if you pop over to your outline real quick, so you can see that.
Yeah.
All right. My issue is now if you hit preview, click on talk and hit preview.
Okay, there are no templates or anything in here, but anyway,
I know, but it will automatically do it. So if you click on talk and hit preview, you're right, because there are no templates, it won't do it. So that's fine. So actually, if you go ahead and go to File and add the HTML template, just so I can demonstrate what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. Okay.
And by the way, before we do that, this might be no, don't do it yet, because this might be a great example of helping people. Stop. Go back to preview.
Yep.
Okay. So somebody's just created a new Tinderbox template, and they hit preview, and they're like, "Wait a minute, where's my stuff? Where's my text? Where's my title?" And it makes you feel like there's nothing happening there. Go ahead and put some text in there real quick. And
because I think that was one of the problems.
Yeah, and then go ahead and hit preview. Yeah. I'm just going to solve a problem for you. So you see, okay, here's some text, but where's my title? So do me a favor, scroll down to the bottom real quick. You'll see the second you hit in the latest version of Tinderbox 9.5, Mark has put in this idea of previews, a preview template. So the second you hit preview, Tinderbox will automatically add what they're calling a preview template. And in the base template, you'll see right there, if you kind of hover over the text anchor, you'll see the template is the text one on the bottom. Sorry. Yeah. No, you got it. Under body, between the body tags.
Oh, sorry.
That's the style.
Sorry, I do apologize. Yeah.
So that's what Tinderbox is doing in the base preview is adding in text. Now, if you want to preview title, can you go ahead and drop in title real quick, Mark?
Yeah.
You can modify the base preview template. Just type in title. I always put the extra caret in because that's what you taught me.
Yeah. I'll explain that for those who wonder why there is this thing. So
let's finish this before you explain that. Now go back up to the note in the beginning.
Yeah.
No, not that. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we need to go to
hit talk and hit preview, and now you're getting both the title and the text. So I just want to demonstrate to people that if you've opened up a new Tinderbox 9.5 document, hit preview and don't see anything. Well, if you don't see anything, it's because your note has no text. If you don't see the title, it's because the preview template by default does not include title. Now, if you scroll back down to your template real quick, Mark,
Yep.
And go ahead and wrap the title with H1 tags, just so we can show people this. And then I want to show one other thing. So now what that will do is when it displays that note, you'll see H1 tags. And then if you want, and then go back, if you want to modify just so people see that. Now go back to your the template.
Yep.
And then if you want to modify it right under the text, can you add the child, show children text?
Yeah,
I know it is. So it's just caret children. And don't worry about adding the template. So just close it with a caret.
Yeah.
Okay. So what just to pause right there, that children. So each of those little carets, title, caret, text, caret, children is what's called export code. And that's the instructions you're giving to Tinderbox to say, export this into produce the HTML to be able to have your HTML export or your preview. So now if we look at talk, you'll see Tinderbox is now why it should have been showing the children. What do we do wrong?
Maybe I do need to do
yeah,
because this is such a new document.
I know why. Okay, yeah, I got it. I know exactly why. I'll show you in a minute.
They've got no text.
No,
they've got no
that's
text.
Not it. That's not it. Hit preview. Now, this is something go to Bush. Click on Bush real quick. If I remember right, now hit preview Bush. Now go back to talk. Okay, yeah, there's something wrong with that in the sense that
what I can do is what I want.
Shouldn't you do this links. Child?
Okay, let's just see if that works. It's probably a bad thing to. There you go. So in this case, I think it's partly because none of the notes underneath have any text, which is confusing Tinderbox. Because at the moment, I'm in the map. I am literally just mapping. I'm just using it as a thinking space.
Well, not only that, Tinderbox also has an issue too. If the note hasn't already been previewed, it won't preview. It has to have been previewed once. So that was that other issue. But so let's not go too far down this path. But just so people can see, this was now introduced in Tinderbox 9.5. This idea of this preview template, and if you start using it and you don't see anything, that's how you work with that.
Well, I can explain a bit more as well.
Yeah, please.
So the other thing is, you'll see in the preview that it relates to putting the style, and that's a CSS style sheet that's put in for you. So what Mark's, because there are two conflicting things going on. There are people who just basically want to have a PowerPoint in their Tinderbox, and ideally not have to do any tweaking, so that effectively the base model just works. It turns out there are a few complications. So it used to be in version 9, I think, when hints first came in, there was a preview template that was put in next to this. But I made the point to Mark, actually, it's a bit like the explode underpinnings. Once you want to use it, you really want to be able to get at the working parts before you use it for the first time. Because for the first time, it's kind of fine, but thereafter you say, right, new document, what I want to do is I want to put in the preview thing because I'm going to make some changes to it. So preview now becomes I think it's shown, it's supposed to show up in the built-in prototypes, and I think, yes, I've recorded. It ought to show up there and doesn't. It will do in due course. But if you basically take a note that has no template set, and there are no export templates already in the document, then it will add the preview template so that you can preview stuff.
Got it. And Mark, and one more thing in the preview, give that, don't call it just preview, give it the full path. In the child, turn it back to children and give it the full back path, templates without quotes, and then it will work.
Okay. So what you're seeing here is you can, as with offsets and a reference, when you want the attribute value of a different note, the bit in export code, we're doing the same as we do if we were referring to the color of another note. And the bit here, you can either write the full path, which is templates, starts with a slash, because that's the root level of the outline, and then templates preview. Or you can, if you don't use the full path, you normally use the name. And the convention I've sort of schooled myself into is that if you put quotes around it, you're basically telling Tinderbox this is a literal value. If you don't put quotes around it, the parser's thinking, oh, this is probably a path.
So I think we found a bug though, because the preview by itself is not working. Because if you go click on talk.
Oh, sorry.
You'll now see it works. So that just preview and quotes by itself is not working. So that might be something we need to report to Mark.
Well, this is one of the reasons that this is why I was saying I wouldn't use prototype names like this, because any of those names could very easily be a note name. I don't think I've got a note called I don't think I've got. Oh, there you go. There's the bug.
Yeah. Right. So there's already a note called preview.
Built-in hints. So if I was to, let's actually, this is interesting. There's another good little lesson that we can do here is if I move that so it's before the hints in the outline. If I get back to here and I set this to
now it worked.
So
it's not a bug, it's a feature.
Exactly. But one that you wouldn't guess if you didn't know. And the reason it's working is because Tinderbox, where's our template? Tinderbox will look at this and say, okay, I'm looking for a note called preview.
In the outline order.
In the outline order. And at the moment it's this, but previously it was this one. And so it tries to use that as a template, and quicks a flash, nothing happens. So on one level, it's an entirely self-inflicted injury. But if you're new to how this all works, it can be almost impossible to guess what's going on.
So so that we haven't confused people, can we start from the very beginning and summarize what we just reviewed? Okay,
so in terms of the preview bit, yeah. Okay, so what we did is we had a very simple document, and what we wanted to do was to preview the note. The first thing we noticed is that preview kind of expects you to have some text in a note, rather in the same way that if you have a note with no text, it normally doesn't. The figure is that you won't export it. But when we first tried preview, nothing happened, and then we added some text. At which point, Tinderbox did two things. It added the built-in hints folder, if it's not already there, and it adds the templates folder for export templates if it's not already there, and into that folder, if it is already there, or as part of the same process, it adds the preview template, which is a sort of built-in template, which you're supposed to be able to add manually from here, but at the moment it's missing from the. It will get added in that thing, so that this now becomes your default template. The other potentially confusing thing is that if you have added an export template before you did this, you may find that all the documents have defaulted to using the template that's added, because from a different perspective, a zero configuration, it's sensible as a zero configuration approach. I'm just going to export my document to HTML pages. I add a template and it's automatically used. So worst case, you might have to tell some of your notes that they need to use this HTML template. So that was the first part we did. So by using preview, we basically added the infrastructure that you can use that allows you a preview template, and if you need it, some CSS which you can edit to add your own personal styling to it. The next thing we showed was that the default only uses the text of the note. So if you want something like the note title, you'd need to add in the export code for that. And if you don't know what those are, or you're unsure of the HTML, just hit up the forum and someone can explain to you. All the export codes are listed on ATBref as to what they are. And as you'll notice, the closing caret is optional. The rationale is you don't need to supply it because Tinderbox will figure out where something ends and where something begins. And in a case like this, it's obvious. It runs to the end of the line, which is sort of treated as a stop. But I have found in the past that if I'm writing a complicated export if statement, invariably something that shouldn't happen would happen. So it's easier. I just find it easier to, and in the examples, I put a closing caret in, and I know Mark doesn't, but the reason I do it mainly is to explain to people who never used it before that if they copy those examples, they are in less danger of
and that's especially the case with commands like end if and things like that, that if you don't have the caret, then it breaks. So it won't break with it, but it will break without it sometimes. So you might as well just put it in. So you can put a caret at the end of text mark. And just so that's the convention of a complete string.
Yeah. But the point is, don't worry. I mean, and if you copied something, don't waste hours sort of trawling through trying to put stuff in. If it works, it works, and that's fine. But that may explain why you see that slight discontinuity. And we also the last thing we did was we showed that you can address a template either by its name, its note name, or via its full path. And the naming collision issue that we had is one of the reasons that certainly Michael and I sort of adopted the approach of putting something like a letter prefix. It doesn't really matter what you do, but my aim. So what I would do is I'd call this something like T prefix. And it doesn't matter what it's called, as long as you, the user, as long as you know what you called it. But the point is, this note will now never have a name collision with that container.
Yeah, so the only issue with that though is like notes like reference and preview actually have an internal function in Tinderbox. So Tinderbox will try to probably at some point put back a note called preview.
Yes. So I'm not suggesting. I was just trying to make the point. So in fact, this should now work, because do you remember when it was in this order, the preview didn't work? So if we go to talk and preview, now it's.
Yeah, no, because look, Tinderbox put the preview back in. So there's
right.
There is some like reference is another one for like references.
Yeah.
Tinderbox is hard coded in Tinderbox. So a couple of them you need to just stick with it. In person's another one that does that.
It's difficult, and I on behalf of the poor developer who's not here, I do feel their pain, because the other side of this coin is people ringing up at a far more basic level saying, why doesn't it work, and why is everything called strange stuff? And I totally get that. Having things that are called what they are is very helpful when you're completely starting out. It's just that you don't have to go far down the complexity path before it helps. So for prototypes and templates, I normally use a prefix letter. Some people use an underscore, some people use an asterisk. I mean, it doesn't really matter. Use the point of doing that sort of pattern is basically to ensure you're using a name that you're not accidentally going to use as a note name. And then it'll cause problems, because generally people end up with all the things like the templates and the hints folder down at the bottom of the outline. So in other words, they get, when you're doing a match, if there is a name collision, there are two notes with the same name, it'll be your content note that gets found. So it's as a general thing, whatever you're doing, where you're doing a find or a match or a query, if Tinderbox finds two or more notes of the same name, it will use as its reference to then complete its coding task the first original note using that name by outline order, which is an attribute, so you can go look it up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so let's pause there. Any questions on this review? I dropped a video in that I've done on this as well. And then if not, we'll go to Chuck. Questions, comments, thoughts?
So should I stop, Chuck? Or is it about this?
No, I was going to bring up another observation. I should put it in the chat.
Oh no, I didn't want you to come back to that because I wasn't done with that, Mark. So when Chuck's done,
okay.
Come back to that.
When Chuck's done, I'll come back.
Yeah, just something I'm noticing, and it's been changing recently with new versions of Zoom, and it's followed me up multiple times. The explanation as to why my microphone suddenly stops working, for instance.
Yes, what's going on?
Is that Zoom, when a user goes into shares their screen. Zoom, at least on my system, switches me to full screen mode. So I get another screen.
Mm.
If I then go back because I keep Zoom and it's just a window, that's when I start having microphone problems. I'm not having it right now, which maybe indicates that they finally fixed this problem, but it's an odd behavior and inconsistent with other applications. And since we're all using Zoom and we're all sharing screens and so forth, I just thought I would point that out because I found it kind of frustrating and it seems to be changing in behavior. So just keep
Well,
an eye
I'm
out
glad
for
you
that.
brought that up because I was going insane last week on a number of calls. So I'm glad it wasn't me or only me.
Yeah.
That's good. Thank you.
So that also makes sense.
Unfortunately, I live in a world where I'm having to use just about every chat, or room sharing service that's out there. So I'm on Teams, I'm on WebEx, I'm on Google's stuff, and they're all different. And they all behave oddly, and they all have quirks with the way they interact with your local system. So,
okay,
anyway.
cool. Mark, can you share your
Sorry
screen again?
Okay.
I now
Yeah,
want to connect.
an interesting note on that, because I'm at the moment sitting here using a pair of 24-inch screens and my laptop on a riser, and that's probably why I'm not hitting this issue. Because when somebody shares, it comes up on one screen. The thing that's really annoying though is it puts all the people in the boxes on my laptop, which is over there, which is not where I want to see it. But first world problem. Right, I'll share again.
Okay. Because the preview was a distraction. That's not where I wanted to talk about beforehand. All right.
Okay.
So we discussed the preview and how that works. Now, if you can go back to map view. So what I've been trying to do, because everyone knows I've been trying to write reports, and so this is a great example of in a map view. I like to have a visual of like what you're doing here, hypertext pioneers, and then you have Bush, and you've got an article written by Bush. Couple things came out of that, and then that kind of rolled up to Engelbart, who's another author. And so from a visual, I love to have this flattened view, but from a piece of writing, and I'm going to, if you don't mind, I want to break your file just a little bit, just to demonstrate it. Now click over to the outline view.
Yeah.
So under Bush, I would prefer to have the as we think underneath Bush, and the mimics and trials underneath the as we may think.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind indexing them in, you can fix them later. But you see, now they've disappeared. And so now I've lost my process view. And, so if I'm writing a report, I want to have this outline so I can actually be writing my report as a linear document of an outline. But then I've lost my map view. And that's what I'm trying to figure out how to solve. Because that image of that map view is really important to me from a logical perspective.
Yeah, and you'll also notice that something else it did was that if you move the notes into another, if you nest them even accidentally, they move to a new XY space, and if you bring them back, they don't remember. Now, if you think about it, why would they remember? They just need to know where they are. But so, for instance, one of the things I've been sort of raising and now we're discussing this on our backstage thing, is that I can see that if I drop a note into another note, so if I was to sort of nest this one, that its current position on this map might conflict with the position of a note on another map. But I suspect in most cases it doesn't, doing this sort of exercise. So one of the suggestions I've made that a note should retain its XY position until it is forced, to move, because perhaps it's going to collide with another note on the thing below. So that, in other words, if you move it back up and down, it doesn't go on a magical mystery tool. Because you may recall that when I re-promoted these to the map, these three notes had to fit themselves in, because it says, okay, they basically were next in the order after this. So normally they'd sort of go in a little row here, but they can't go there because this is in the way and this is in the way. So that's why you got that sort of odd layout. But it does show the problem that the computer in this has. In our mind's eye, we know exactly where we want something to go, but we don't have a way to signal that. particularly easily to the computer.
Yeah. So, and again, I'm probably not the only person with this issue, but that's hopefully that makes sense on what I'm trying to convey, because I want that map view. And frankly, what I'll do in my work is I'll create that map view. I'll take a screenshot of that and then actually drop that in my report as a figure. And so then I'll be writing in my outline per the history of hypertext pioneers, Bush, Engelbart, Nelson, and then see image, see figure 1.
Yeah, I mean, I'm coming to the conclusion, knowing all the sort of things that have been thought out in the past and haven't worked, that the likely solution, albeit possibly at the cost of another view, is that there ought to be something that can probably use a lot of the code that's already used for the map, but basically to actually make maps of outlines.
Yeah, and maybe you in one control you could add to that is how deep do you want the flattening to go? Like, 1 to 2, 3 layers, probably no more than 3.
Well, an easy way to do that would be to make that basically the map would show you the expanded branches in your outline. So if you collapsed a node, then it wouldn't show its contents in its flattened view.
Yeah,
would be a sort of a fairly simple thing to do. But I mean, I'm conscious in saying this is not something that anyone has said is possible or will be done, but that's a suggestion that's floating around at the moment. Because one of the things I'm always conscious in this is that often it's a simple solution that actually ends up with a boatload of engineering, and I'm a concern I have for the users as a whole is that if we made it easier to do maps of outlines in a current map, I'm absolutely sure it would just break something that somebody really needs. So It seems sensible to perhaps have what might be another view, but hopefully wouldn't require Eastgate to go and write a ton of new code.
Yeah.
Just that. So it should be able to use a lot of what's there for the map, but it would have some special constraints for the specific purpose at hand.
Perfect. Okay. So any other thoughts, comments, questions here before we move on to another topic? But thank you, Mark. That was awesome. That's thoroughly enjoyed that. Who else has anything else? If not, we can pop into another conversation that came up in the forum that I think could be useful.
Just a quick one to circle back to when you've done that is I just circle around and check with Dave's point about not queries, because you talked about the exclamation point, and I totally get that. And one of the things that I'll ask about later, but let's go to the thing you were going to, and then we can circle back around later.
Yeah, and again, this is for lack of the community, the people on the call raising any other topic. If there isn't any other one, I'll just start going down this path. And if you want we want to stop or do something different, we can. But I thought this was relevant and interesting in that someone on the community had raised this question, and so I don't break the demo, let me call this list 2. They raised this question. I've got this, and let's explore this together in this conversation. So the person says, I have a body of text that has this pattern, and their question was, how do I get name and name 2? How do I explode this note so that name and name 2 become the name of the notes? And I made it a presumption their concept of secondary name became a short title or some kind of subtitle, and then description became the body text of a note. And if you were to simply use the explode function without doing anything unique or special, and you say simply, I'm now going to explode this note on paragraphs, what you end up getting is this. So you get name, secondary name, you get name, title, secondary title, and that's what you get. So the question or the for the remaining 30 minutes, if you may not have already watched the video that or the answer I gave on the forum about this, why don't we explore how we might go about doing this? How do we explode these notes? So name becomes name, secondary name becomes a subtitle, and description becomes description. So anybody have any thoughts? I don't necessarily want to just give the answers. So let's go ahead and explore some ideas.
Sorry, I actually didn't understand the question.
So the question is, I've got this note that has this stuff in the text, and I want to explode this note. So name becomes name. So I want to explode this note. So I end up with this name and this is the subtitle. This is the result we want at the end for each of the notes. So how do we automatically explode this list so that I end up with two notes that basically look like this?
It seems like an perfect use of the tagger, but maybe I'm not getting it.
Well, no, tagger would be tagger would be, I already have a note and I'm going to use tagger to automatically tag the contents of this note. Before we can use tagger, we first need to explode this note. Break this essentially by breaking up the list. I've got to explode these into two different notes first. So what would we suggest? And so when we first tried to do the explode, we didn't get what we wanted. So what would anybody have any other thoughts? What else we might do? I can quickly jump to the answer, but I thought we could have a thought experiment around this, or an answer. I shouldn't say that the answer.
Would you use some action code during the explode, along with the explode?
Absolutely. So then that raises the question: what action code would we use? And maybe this would also, let's talk about the problem we're solving, solutions. Solution. So one step we want to do is one is to explode the notes. Two is to get name into title. Three, get secondary name into short title. And then four, everything after first period is text. Right? And then there's some cleanup.
To avoid some confusion, you want short title or subtitle? You use subtitle.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I use my short titles in my muscle memory.
Right, that's why I mentioned it.
So remove, and then what we want to do, e.g., remove title. And what else do we want to remove out here? We want to remove the hyphen. Yeah. And there's some other things to think about here too. So we want to remove these patterns out of the text. So remove this hyphen space, remove the word title. And the other things to just think about that we need to contend with when we look at this pattern is we don't really have a consistent pattern. There's no period before this description. And this pattern, this doesn't have a space after that space. So those are some of the things that we'll need to think through. So how would you guys suggest we go about doing this? And another reason why we want to do this is super, super common. So for example, if you were to copy a list of stuff from the internet, paste it into a note, and then want to explode that out and parse it into a bunch of other notes for your research, this is the type of thing you'd want to go about doing. So that's a use case of how you'd want to use this.
I presume you're heading down the fun with regex path.
Perhaps. But we can get there a long way without regex, just using some standard Tinderbox functions or operators. So anybody want to give a guess, or should I start walking us through the method?
I think you should go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead. So for me, the first thing I would do is, I know I'm going to want my notes to have a subtitle. And so the first thing is I'm going to run off and I'm going to go create a prototype. I'm going to call it P Note 2. And I'm going to give that note the subtitle. So that whoops. So that way, when I'm doing my explode, those notes get the subtitle. The other thing I'll then do is on explode notes. I can do it that way too. So that way I can make sure that my notes, when I explode them, get the subtitle. So let's add that first step to the process. So if I go to explode and I say the action on explode is I want the prototype to equal P-note 2. So that way, when I hit explode, and let's just do it that way. So we've not got another set of explode, and I didn't type it right. Oh, that's interesting. That should have worked. Because I did the wrong list. Now let's see.
Yeah, have you fixed the line break yet?
Not yet. So I'm doing explode.
I didn't know that was a nested lesson or not.
Yeah, not yet. So I'm doing explode equals P-note 2. Prototype equals P-note 2, P-note 2. And when I hit explode, that should have... Oh, it did. Okay, I just did it wrong the first time. I must have had a typo. So you'll see that I've exploded those notes. We still have the same problem, but I've exploded the notes. And so now the prototype P-note 2 is now being assigned to those notes I explode. So now I can get a sense of what's happening and what's going on there. So that's the first step that I've done.
If you give P-note to a color, and then it's a bit more obvious.
Okay.
When the change occurs.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and open up our inspector. And we go here, and we're going to say P-note 2 is going to be not text. Normal, and there you go. P-note 2 is going to be red. Okay. So now you see that I've assigned now that because I've assigned on explode in the action, it's going to assign the prototype to that note. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I want to actually, it's interesting. So now we go here, you'll see different behaviors are happening. This is fascinating. Oh, I see, because my source text was different from the demo. So let me do this real quick. So that's why that's happening. So let's go here, fix the source text. So that was our original source text. And now if I hit explode again, you'll see, so I'm getting, here's the full text. And you'll notice let's take a look at what Tinderbox is doing. You'll notice Tinderbox is already stripped out of the name after the period. So anything after the period is not being included in the name. And this is a really important concept to keep in mind. And if we go to the, and this is where ATB ref comes in, is really important. So I'm going to pull up ATB ref. Okay, so on ATB ref, you have the explode popover. And you'll note right here where ATB ref says this: a sentence is delimited by a terminating period, exclamation mark, or a question mark. A paragraph is delimited by a line return. So what's happening here, and for the unbeknownst user that's reading into this might not understand what's happening. What this is telling Tinderbox, and Mark, I do think we might want to have a little bit more of an explicit example in this to help people with that. What this essentially is meaning is that when Tinderbox looks to do this explode on these lists, you'll see here by default it says first sentence. So Tinderbox by default is going to try to explode the note on the first sentence. And as we've learned in reading ATB ref, a sentence is defined by one of these punctuation marks. So Tinderbox is going to see first sentence and say, okay, I need to explode myself at the period. So that's what's happening there. And it took me, I had to do a couple readovers for my own self to figure that out. So with Tinderbox, by definition, when it sees explode this note at the paragraph mark at the first sentence, what it's doing is it's grabbing the text, sticking everything before the period in the including the period in the name, and then everything after, and then leaving everything in the text untouched. And that's how that's how Tinderbox is deriving the name of your note. So that's the first step that we would do in this process. So the next explode that we did is we want to say, well, you know what though? Now what I want to do is I want to remove the name from the text itself. So now I'm going to go ahead and add another action code here. And I'm going to say text equals name dot replace name.
Why would you not use replace remove title from text, which does what you just typed?
Well, because I didn't know, I might not have been aware of that. So right. But let's say I want to do this, right? So what Mark is Mark is suggesting a really good point. So I'm going to undo this. So if I uncheck that remove title from text, and I wasn't thinking clearly, and I was thinking more code or not, then if I do that, you'll see that Tinderbox has actually removed the title from the text automatically. If you were not to have done that and you wanted to do that via action code, this will do the same thing, right? If that's unchecked, it will say, take the text of the note, grab the name of the note, and then sorry, not the name. Take the text of the note, and then in the text, sorry, typo. In the text, replace name with nothing, right? And so this checkbox here is essentially doing the exact same thing as that action code here, but this is just another way of explaining an action code. So if I were to do that and now hit explode, you'll now see I've achieved the, why did that not work? I must have had a typo here. Text equals text dot replace. Replace.
It might be because name hasn't been populated yet. One of the things to bear in mind that can bite you when you start to get sort of fancy with this is you have to start thinking, well, what does the compute has the program? Well, what point is the note at? Does it actually have a name value assigned?
Yeah,
it may have sort of pulled these things apart. So there's normally a little bit of trial and error.
Yeah, but this was actually working in one of my other demos. But let's go ahead and, for the sake of saving everybody's time here, let's go ahead and use that one. All right. So that way, now we've exploded out we've pulled the name out of the text. And so now we have the next level of cleanup. That how do we want to, now we have the text that we want, but now we've got to be cleaning up the name. So the question is, how do we go about cleaning up the name? And there are a number of ways to go about doing that. One, you could do regex. Another example that I played with was this one. And before I get to that, then I'm going to show one other example, which is kind of interesting, in that when you're doing explodes like this, if you start writing, this is a small box to be writing a lot of action code. So there's another interesting thing you can do is, let's say we want to call a stamp, and we're going to name that stamp explode for the lack of creativity. Okay. And what we can do down here now is we're going to go and create ourselves a stamp. And you'll notice the second I created that stamp, here, let me turn on hints. So I'm now going to add the hints folder to Tinderbox. And here are stamps, and I can now create a stamp called explode. And this is where we can start typing in our action code. So our first action code we had was this. And our next action code we might want to play with is something like this. And I'm just going to copy and paste this over so that we get it. And go like that. Okay. So then the next action code you might want to do is saying, what I want you to do now, Tinderbox, is create a variable for myself, which is a list of splitting the name. And dot split function in Tinderbox, what that's doing is it's going to say at this pattern, and because there's no space there, we can't do the space. So at a space hyphen, I want you to split this item. And so what I want you to essentially do is everything before this pattern, stick it in the first part of the list, and everything after that pattern, stick it in the second part of the list. And so let me do an example of how we do that. And this is another way of experimenting.
Just a quick note on that to bear in mind, in case it's not obvious to people. That means that when you use split, the pattern, the bit of text or the pattern or regex pattern you define is removed. So when you split on space hyphen, you'll have everything up to that point, then no space hyphen, then the next bit, and those become the parts of the list that's created.
So let's demonstrate that function just so people can see it. So this is our list, and what we're going to say is my list equals equals name.split at this hyphen space. So if we go up to one of our test notes here, and I'm going to apply that stamp split, you'll see what the split function has done. Just like Mark said, it's removed the pattern space hyphen, and it's created a list, title name, and then secondary name. And then similarly here, if I apply that stamp, you'll see it's done title name and secondary name. Now, an important thing to see here is that space here doesn't exist there. And the reason that is because our source content doesn't have that space in the pattern. So these are some of the nuances that you'll want to be paying attention to as you're cleaning up your code or you're doing these kinds of things. And it's one of those examples of garbage in, garbage out. You may think you see a pattern, but the computer actually sees a pattern you might have missed. Like you might not have noticed that this one doesn't have a space and that one does, whereas the computer will notice that. And so those are some of the things you'll want to be sensitive of as you're exploding fairly significant and large lists. So that kind of teaches you how to do the dot split function. Now, the reason why I'm doing it as a variable is I don't want a bunch of kitty litter in my notes. I don't need to populate this attribute value because I only need it for this part. I'm not going to use it at any other point in time in the future. So I'm going to stick it in as a temporary variable for now, perform the functions on it that I want to perform, and then later do it. So then the next function I'm going to do in this explode is I'm going to say vlist at position 0 dot replace. And then I'm using another replace function. I'm saying what I want you to do is replace title space with nothing. And then the second one I want you to say is on the subtitle in our variable vlist dot at the second space. I'm going to do I'll explain the zeros and the ones in just a minute. I want you to replace the period with nothing. So if we go back in here, let's look at this. So here's the title. I'm trying to remove that. And then on the second, so I'm trying to remove the word title out of this list here. And then after this, I'm trying to get rid of that period. Similar, same thing here. I'm trying to get rid of the title. I'm trying to get rid of the period. So Mark, you want to say something?
One more in that you may find if you have a problem with either spaces turning up at the beginning or the end, and you didn't want them, and Tinderbox tries to be reasonably clever. If you give something a name, set the name of a note, and it starts with a space, it will tend to remove that on the grounds that you really probably didn't mean that. But there's a trim function that's described in ATBRef that will either trim both ends or just back or front. So that again is something else that you might, not necessary in this case, but you might find that you might use in a situation like this as another.
And to use that, we could actually replace this right here with dot trim. Correct?
Yes, because I think it will do punctuation as well, which is another useful thing.
Let's experiment with that in just a minute. So now if I run this stamp on my explode, it's going to apply the P note. It will produce it will split the list. It will clean up the title, and it will clean up the subtitle. And if I haven't screwed it up, let's see what happens. So what I'm going to do is, and rather than calling my prototype here, I'm now going to say, I want you to call the stamp explode. and I want you to remove the sentence from the text as we explained before. And now when I do it, I get exactly what we wanted in the beginning. I got the name, I've got the subtitle with no period, and I have the text in the beginning. And so that's just kind of a methodical approach one might go through in cleaning up some stuff. And you might think, well, why did I spend all of this time just trying to solve 2 lines when I could have done it manually? The reality is, one is the 2 lines is this lets you learn in a smaller subset example. When you have 100 of these lines and the pattern's more complex, this process will automate take a 30-minute to 1 hour exercise down to 2 minutes. So once you kind of learn this process of kind of figuring out the right kind of steps that you want to do, then that works. Now let's change this and call this explode 2 and see if our trim function works. So there's another function in Tinderbox called trim. And if we pull up ATBRef and we type trim, you'll see a string.trim in ATBRef, and that is telling us that it will trim. So I think we need to have it trim punctuation. We can't just say trim. If you just say trim, it will remove a space. Yeah. And if you say trim punctuation, it will actually remove the punctuation. So if we go in here and we say trim punctuation, am I spelling it right? Punctuation.
No, it's after the first T.
Let me just do this. There you go. Okay. Whoops. All right. So now we're going to expect that the dot replace function is going to do the exact same thing as this trim. So let's see if that's the case. And this is now in our Scamp explode 2. And if I reset our view, I can now go and see that the trim function did exactly the same process as the this replace dot is the exact same thing as trim dot punctuation. So it's kind of just lets you see how you can just methodically use the various operators and functionality within Tinderbox to achieve the goal of splitting out notes.
Something else, just notice, I mean, I don't know if you're actually you'll notice that when you started exploding, the exploded notes prototype gets added. And that the role of that basically is to give you a bigger action box. Because what you're actually doing so when you do an explode, it first of all creates a child container called exploded notes, lowercase, and it puts all the exploded notes inside that. And so the action box on the explode dialog is effectively the on add action of the exploded notes container. So that was the original way, and the exploded notes prototype was added. Notice a different case, so you don't get a name collision. So the idea being that if you wanted to do some really, really complicated long bit of code, you could make that the on-add action of the exploded notes.
Yeah.
You might want to set it up in advance, for instance, or run a small test, and then it's all ready. Then you select your big note, your enormous bit of text, hit explode, and it all automatically happens. So in that case, you could leave the action box empty on the dialogue. Yeah, because this prototype is there, so it's kind of like the advanced driver bit. Most people probably, if they just need a short bit of code or you're in a hurry, use the action box on the dialogue. But if you've got something longer, especially where you need to see it written out in a form you can understand, then it helps to use the exploded notes prototype, and that's why it's there.
Yep. Okay.
One other comment. You said trim and replace would be the same. Not quite. Right. And one good reason for using ATBRef is that in many cases, Mark Bernstein has put into Tinderbox dot operators like trim that deal with a whole series of problems. So it will deal with any of the punctuation that might terminate a string. So period, exclamation point, question mark, a couple of other things that are in there. I think it deals with carriage returns. So it's dealing with a whole basket of potential issues that someone is very likely to run into, versus if you try to do it with replace, you're going to have to deal with each one of those instances yourself.
Correct. And on that note, I'm really glad you brought that up. And on that note, so you might see here, and this is another, let me, since we've got our base code here, we can go ahead and do this. I'm going to remove the / in front of that period. And now we're going to try, and we're using the explode base function. And now watch what happens. If I do this and I try to explode this note, period's gone, and I'm going to explode it. You'll notice that, actually, we didn't get the subtitle,
right?
And and that the values of that subtitle are completely gone. And the reason why that's the case is this: what's happening here is we think that we're just saying, oh, this is just title and a space, or this is just a space and a hyphen, or this is just a period. What's happening in the background is Tinderbox is using a convention from the 1950s called regular expression, which is a methodology for pattern matching when doing pattern matching by computing. And so this, to our eye, this is just text. To Tinderbox, this is actually functional patterns. And in the regular expression methodology, a period is actually a operational command. So if you want the Tinderbox to know that in this case, I'm not calling the operational command of period, what I'm actually doing is calling an actual period. You do a / in front of it, which is essentially what's called escaping that character. And that's saying, treat this as a period, not as a function of regular expression. And there are a handful of other special class characters in the regular expression, like a parentheses, bracket, asterisk, and a handful of other characters within regular expression that need to be escaped if you actually want them treated as characters. Another great example of that one, and I was alluding to this earlier in our conversation with Dave Rogers in terms of doing hashtags. So when you do hashtags, for example, let's say hashtag Tinderbox, hashtag note taking. And then let's say you wanted to do in your social media, you wanted to say anchor Eastgate, right? Because you're actually, or anchor Bernstein, because you're actually not doing a term, but you're actually trying to call out an individual, like we do in ATB Ref, or like we do in our forum. Well, an @ in regex, or it actually it has a value. So what you do is you can escape those, or not just regex, but if you're like using tools like Pandoc, or other processing tools that see that character as having functional value, you can escape that functional value by, again, using the /. And so then if you're trying to do social media posts, you'll actually be able to insert that kind of nomenclature without triggering some other operational function that your code is looking for. So that's just a little aside. So we spent a long time going through this. Hopefully this was valuable to people, because you can kind of get a sense of, again, more of the power of Tinderbox and what we're doing.
I've got a very quick one. Something that we didn't need to for the starting example that's worth noting is that the default for Explode is to explode basically at every hard line break paragraph, essentially, in the thing. There's another option, which is to explode at a custom delimiter.
Right. So
and
let's do that.
That again can either be so in effect, if you were to open up if you just opened up, but when you open up the dialogue, so when it basically explodes at paragraphs, it's actually exploding at one or more sequential line break characters, \n+ is what it's probably using in regex terms. And when you click that, I can't quite see it on my screen because it's just slightly hidden by the thing. But basically, there's there you go. So when you set break at delimiter, there's another little box shows up and it will remember during your current Tinderbox session what you last typed in there. So if you've been using that, you want to go around, and because invariably the first one you try doesn't work, and so it's rinse and repeat. A useful thing you can do is if you are doing an export, say in some other thing, you've got to get a boatload of text. Or the classic thing, you need to get a report out of something where you have very little control, and about the only thing you can do is make a lot of plain text. If you put in something that will not turn up as content, as it were, anyway, I find something like 5 or 6 hash marks. Because a hash mark is not a regex character, and the likelihood that someone will use that many hash characters is very low. And then if you put that either at the beginning of where you want the breaks to occur, or the line before, basically when you turn Tinderbox to split on a marker, a bit like the function that we had, the split function, the marker that you match is consumed. So it says, oh right, I see. So you've asked me to split on 6 hash marks and a line break. Right, found that. I'll remove that, and then what comes after, and then it just repeats all the way down until it's done all those, and then those become your notes. So
for example,
it just comes up every so often where the thing is, I don't want to notice every paragraph. What I want is every report that's in this report of 100 reports.
So for example, let's say you had an explanation hash mark and you said, I want to split wherever this shows up in the text. So now if I go here, and we're not going to do our explode, I'll do my delimiter and say, I want you to, hey, Tinderbox, I want you to split at that, right? And now if I hit explode, Tinderbox has now split wherever that was shown up. So that's another way of doing that.
I had exactly the same situation come up just 2 weeks ago, and I sent Eastgate an alarm message like, heck, I'm trying to explode. We have this common habit of using hashtag $hashtag. And I think, Mark, we've had a discussion on how it's like something that's just come down over the ages. And well, that tends to break, explode.
That might, because that does something weird.
Well, no, because dollar sign is a regex.
Regex.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry,
exactly.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you did, as I said before, if you did this, Tinderbox is going to see the dollar sign as a regex command, because that means end of line. So if you wanted to use the dollar sign in your text, in this case, I would highly suggest you don't, because it's just going to complicate it for you. But if you wanted to, you put an escape character in front of that, and then that would tell Tinderbox that dollar sign is actually a dollar sign. It's not a command. So let's use that. Let's actually use that as an example. That's a good teaching moment. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's mess with our text. So let's say you were trying to explode at this, and what we're going to quickly learn more often, I would suspect, is this is going to fail. So if we go up here and we try to explode at that, it doesn't work because the dollar sign is actually a reserved character. So now if we escape the dollar sign, now it works, because we've told Tinderbox the dollar sign is actually a dollar sign and not one of the functional reserved characters.
Yeah, and my sort of learning takeaway was that if you ever try to do something very basic and normal in Tinderbox, and for some reason it doesn't work, like it's not just a crazy exception, it probably is regex is tapping on shoulder.
Yeah, it's probably some reserved character.
One thing in the recent rewrite, although it changed all the URLs for the first time in ages, but one of the things I did in ATB Ref for 9.5 was I tried to make more explicit, certainly for action codes, what is and isn't using a regex. And it's also confusing for a lot of people, because just because something can use a regular expression doesn't mean it has to. Your regular expression can literally just be the text you want to find.
Well, because that is a regular expression.
Yeah, but is that because once you understand that fact, yes, it makes sense. But of course, if you don't, I remember when I first sort of came across this, it confused the heck out of me. How can it be both these things? Until I realized that literally a literal bit of text is a perfectly valid regular expression.
So, for
even though it
example,
has some
this.
regular expression characters in it. But it's the kind of thing they don't tell you on line one of the explanation.
So, for example, title space is a regular expression. It's go find the text title plus a space.
Yeah.
You know, there are other languages that have somewhere along the evolution of them started creating all their operators and whatnot to distinguish between whether you're dealing with a string or a regex. And it's slightly unfortunate that Tinderbox doesn't do that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've hit the top of the hour, or top of the hour and a half, I should say. Hopefully this was of value to the community, and we can continue on. For next week, if you have a topic or something that you want to review, we'll have our next event is next Saturday. We can certainly do a themed approach if we like.
Just one very quick one on Explode, just as a quick tail piece. I know Mark's worked overtime to make Explode even snappier, but annoying people like myself tend to put enormous amounts into Explode. And sometimes it will, if you've given it some sort of regex to do, the more items it has to spit out, there is a sort of thing, it tends to take longer. So don't worry. Generally, if you just leave it for a bit, it will all come back. As you saw here, it's instantaneous. But if you say gave it 500 things to split out, because you're doing a data ingest or something, this was sort of start of research information is what it normally is for me. Then don't worry. It hasn't probably crashed, but it's just taking a while to run through all the regex.
One other tip. One other tip while we're at it too is when you're experimenting with Explode, it's highly advised to for instance, do this and say raw note, right? So because invariably, as you're experimenting with regex and as you're experimenting with parsing out, you are going to accidentally erase your content because you'll do a bad exception, or you'll like we did with the period, and your content's gone. So if you have a raw note, you can always copy your original text, paste it back in, and then continue to work on your pattern matching until you've gotten it right. But having that backup of a copy of your text is really good, because Explode with regex can be destructive if you've made a mistake.
So, and one other neat feature, you might wonder why there's always an Explode notes and it doesn't sort of reuse them or number them. That's for another case where some people use Explode a lot, and they have sort of like an agent running, and it looks for anything that's in an exploded notes container and does stuff to it. So that's why they don't number. They don't number. And so it's another neat affordance for those that might need it.
Well, I also like it too, because I can see, all right, this is the first time I tried, this is what worked, this is what didn't work, and then by the time I get to the 10th round, I'm like, okay, I finally got a pattern that works, and then I can just go ahead and delete those and then keep the one that worked. So a lot of little nuances here that we've discussed today.
You can also sort all those same named folders by created or something, and or even add it to the name.
Sure. Alrighty. I think we've covered a lot today. Anybody else? Comments, questions, thoughts, ideas? Bruce, if you want to hit me up later, I can show you some templating stuff that you might find valuable. If not, that's fine.
No, I appreciate the offer and thank you. I will reach out to you by email.
All right. Perfect. All righty. So I'm going to hit stop and we'll call it a day. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.